utility just to take you beyond, from A to B. They describe the utility bicycle as a tool for living. So it would be great if you, from now on, think of a utility bicycle as the equivalent of a vacuum cleaner. When you need a vacuum cleaner, you get it out of the closet and you use it and you put it back in. It should have that kind of ubiquitous nature to it. It's just a tool you need in life to get by. And plus you want it to do all this great stuff that your ordinary bike that you bought that had all the Go Faster stripes on it can't do. So the inspiration for me to go with a wooden bicycle was from Renovo. Renovo is a Portland-based manufacturer, I would say not a manufacturer, a boutique producer of very high-end monocoque hardwood bicycles. When I say boutique, I mean we're talking $5,000 to $7,000 high-end road machines. Jim Wheeler, who founded Renovo, I think really proved that you could make a bicycle out of wood, and not just make a bicycle, but make a bicycle that excels at what it has to do. And his background was aeronautics. He built a bunch of wooden aircraft. Jeff has also built wooden sailing boats that have been raced. In the bicycle industry, I think a lot of people have an idea that a wooden bike is going to be too heavy or not strong enough. The fact that you can build high-performance boats and aircraft out of wood and glue puts pay to that idea. It's a perfectly adequate material, just not many people have done it. The other inspiration, and this kind of came later, was through the what is sometimes referred to as the West system, which is a way of using plywood and epoxy resin to create these composite structures. That was developed by the, and you'll have to, Goujon brothers on the East Coast, who started experimenting in the late 60s and early 70s with epoxy resin, and eventually developed their own epoxy resin that had better coating properties. Many of the boats that they designed and built are still racing to this day. They've definitely stood the test of time. And there's an entire industry based around kit boats and kit kayaks that are all assembled using this system, plywood and epoxy resin. The other inspiration was that I happened to know that Jeff had access to a very large CNC router. That was huge, because without it, it would not have been possible. Well, it would have been possible, but it would have been a real slog. The CNC technology really took a lot of the donkey work out of it. So, why a cargo bike? Well, two reasons. Number one, we both owned cargo bikes, and we kind of liked them. We liked the possibility of cargo bikes and what you can do with it. Having a cargo bike has allowed me to get rid of my cars and live car-free, which is incredibly liberating. It has some limitations, but generally it's just a win-win. I lived in LA for 10 years and had 2 junkers that I kept shoveling money at. And for some reason, you couldn't even exist with 1 car in LA. You had to have 2 if you had a family. So part of the reason to come to Portland was that it offered this opportunity to live in a small, compact city and ditch the car, which I've done very happily for the last 5 years. So, we were both enamored of cargo bikes. And there was another reason. Because we were dealing with an unusual material in the eyes of consumers and the bicycle industry, we felt it was important to choose a bike that wasn't an archetype. The conventional diamond frame bicycle is a very recognizable form. You can have the simplest cartoon of a bicycle, everyone immediately knows what it is. So having that, choosing something that wasn't obvious allowed us more leeway to present this material. People weren't going to have assumptions about what you could and couldn't do, because it's a cargo bike. It's not yet established in the sense what a cargo bike is. Is it a long tail? Is it a tricycle? Is it a buck-feet style cargo bike like this? It's wide open right now, and that was part of the appeal to us. Plus, we felt we had, in context of utility and in context of the Oregon Manifest competition, we felt that there was more opportunity to design in utility with something like a cargo bike. It's bigger, you can put more features on it. Most conventional bikes that are presented at the Oregon Manifest are a conventional bike with front and rear carriers. There's some innovation in that, but not a lot. This allowed us a much bigger canvas on which to explore these ideas. The design evolution was kind of interesting. This is not how I thought this thing would look when I started. I imagined something more like a Renovo bicycle, which is very fluid, very sculptural, has a lot of curves and sweeps. But on the way to that goal, we decided to make a down and dirty proof of concept that we could do relatively quickly and easily. Cut it out in the CNC out of plywood, slide it all together, glue it up, and go with that. In the process of doing that, we discovered that actually that down and dirty methodology was actually a better way to go. We could achieve more of what we wanted to achieve with that methodology than we could going for this very slick-looking sculptural look. So hence the very slab-like look to this thing, because it is comprised of two-dimensional surfaces all glued together. The other great thing was the design synergy that came between Jeff and myself. Jeff is a neighbor of mine, and we're good friends, and we trust each other's knowledge. I know about bicycles, Jeff knows about wood, composite structures, and boats, and we don't tread on each other's toes as far as our area of expertise. If Jeff tells me something can't be done, then I adapt to make it happen, and vice versa. If I say a bicycle's got to have this, we'll find that solution. And that has been one of the most fun things about this project, is this meeting of minds over this object. So this is the proof of concept that we built to prove that it could be done before we started on the final model, which is what will actually be presented to the Oregon Manifest for the design challenge. So as you see, everything was cut out in pieces, like so, slotted together after first being liberally slathered with epoxy resin. And then we mixed the epoxy resin either with a silica powder or wood flour or tile grout was another thing we used. Chalk. Also carbon fiber strands. We experimented with a lot of ways to create these fillets at the joins. So we mix up this goop, we run it into the fillet, let it set. It creates an incredibly strong, unified structure. In fact, most of the joins on this, the wood will fail before the glue does. So if you really could, wail on one of these things, the wood would start to delaminate before that epoxy resin joint falls apart. And that's, in a sense, the sheer strength of the surfaces and the strength of the joins is what gives it its strength. Because most pieces, you can see this is unglued. It's incredibly wobbly and unsteady. But once you glue it all together, it makes an absolutely rigid structure. Interestingly, we thought we'd have most trouble with getting the rigidity on the rear end, and that this area here, which has all these cross pieces, would be very stiff. It actually turned out to be completely the opposite. This rear end is bomber. This front end was a real struggle to get it tightened down. And the final thing that got it all tightened down was to close off the box completely, which we hadn't conceived of doing in the first place. I kind of like the idea of seeing all these profiles exposed. But if you do that, the whole front end is like noodly as anything. As soon as you close it off, everything locks into place. You'll notice that here, where you see the black fillet, that's an experiment with carbon fiber strands that we teased out from some cloth and kind of rolled into rope and stuck into there. This here is the wood flour, and then the orange one that you can see here is the chalk with some, what was the orange?
It's a chalk line chalk.
Chalk line chalk. Nice bright orange chalk line chalk mixed in with the epoxy. And that kind of is what binds everything together, the chalk, the epoxy, and the wood. The epoxy creates a mechanical connection. As it soaks into the pores of the wood, it literally creates this matrix that holds everything together. And it's incredibly strong. I mean, you can go crazy on this. It won't give on you. Some of the interesting thing is there's a lot of flat surfaces. So, you know, we incorporated a coat hook. May seem frivolous, but it's actually a great way of hanging your bag on there when you're riding. Here we put a steel doorknob. Again, initially that was just to finish off a hole, but we realized that when you want to step it up a curb, it actually gives a nice convenient place. But the interesting thing about this is it opened up a whole new design language that's not available when you're designing an ordinary bike. You have all these flat surfaces. You can suddenly incorporate things that you couldn't incorporate before. As far as the performance goes, this bike completely exceeded our expectations. We thought when we built a wooden bike that there would be some kind of accommodation you needed to do, that riding it would require some kind of special trick. But actually, after a couple of weeks of riding it around, you sort of realize, well, there's actually nothing really remarkable about this. It's just like a bicycle. You get on it, you ride, it steers, it brakes, it does everything you'd want a bicycle to do, albeit with an extended cargo bed. This bike ended up weighing 51 pounds. Now, normally, talking about the weight of a cargo bike is fairly senseless because they're big, heavy machines. However, I mention it because the lightest production cargo bike available, which is the Bullet by Harry and Larry from Denmark, is only a couple of pounds lighter than this thing. This came in at 51 pounds. Okay, admittedly, only one gear, coaster brake, fairly basic, no sides or anything like that. But that really blew us away. We had no idea that not only would we produce a cargo bike that really functioned, a wooden bike that did everything we wanted to do, but it was actually really light and stiff. That was a real surprise to us. The closest production cargo bike in weight, I think, is the Setma out of Eugene, which I think is about 70 pounds. And then the Buckfeets, the big old Dutch stretch limo that I ride around, with the electric motor, I think is over 100 pounds. So this is almost half the weight. So not only, we suddenly realized we're onto something here. This is not just a gimmick. It's not just like, hey, cool, we got a wooden bike. It actually performs way beyond we expected. Now this, I don't believe this has the weight capacity that we would have wanted. I can ride with Jeff on the front of this, and it's a bit sketchy. The thing's like, so 75 pounds, 100 pounds, absolutely fine. Once you get over 100 pounds, it starts getting a little bit more tenuous. But for a first time out of the gate, we were pretty pleased with that. We figured we were hitting 90% of our target there. So we learned that it could be done. And so that led to model number 2, that we took and we're in a constant process of experimentation and discovery. So, you know, I'm absolutely convinced we're going to build this, and there's going to be a bunch of stuff I love about it, and there's going to be a bunch of stuff I hate. There's really stuff I hate about this. And it was the same with this. When I first started building this, I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. I don't like this. Oh, this looks crap. And as soon as it worked really well, I was like, oh, I love it. It's great. So number 2, a couple of big differences is the material. This was built from 1/4-inch birch ply, which is a pretty good material. It's easily available. It doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. Fairly easy to work with. But we got chatting with the guys at Bamboo Revolution down on MLK, and they were suggesting their 5-ply bamboo. As we haven't built this yet, I couldn't tell you whether that was a stroke of genius or a really bad idea, and what we'll find out. It is a little heavier. It's much more difficult to cut. It blunts the cutter on the router much quicker, and it gives the most vicious splinters you've ever seen. I don't know if you've ever picked up a prickly pear cactus by mistake, and it's got those tiny microscopic little splinters. Well, that's what this is like. So big changes here. This was all made, this piece that you see here that runs all the way through to here, that was all one piece, and we tortured it around these profiles here. And that was the mother of all glue-up sessions, and used every single clamp we possibly had in the shop. And Jeff has a lot of clamps, he's a boat builder. I mean, it looked like one of those, you know, lines you see at sea with all the things sticking out of it. It was pretty amazing. This time we've built the rear stays using stacked laminates. So this is bamboo flooring from Walmart. Comes in, it's like 1/2 inch thick, 3 foot lengths. We trimmed it all down and stuck it on the CNC and cut out this profile and stacked them up and glued them. And we trimmed this to shape. So this is the chain stays, which go right there. And this is the seat stay, which should go right in there. And then we're going to drill the hole for the seat tube, which is steel, to run through to there. We glue a bottom bracket in the bottom. The other change was to use a stacked laminate like this for the head tube that goes right in there. So that is the equivalent of this spot right here. So it takes the steering mechanism. The jury's out on whether going with a lot of stacked laminates like this is going to work. It's definitely a little heavier, but it does allow us to really maximize the accuracy of the CNC machine to ensure the alignment of the frame. Alignment on this frame is a real problem because you're doing this massive glue up, and I think we started at this end and we worked our way down, and then we realized that this part and this part weren't in agreement because they were kind of like this. And so there was a lot of kind of bashing things to make it line up. With this design, we're much more confident with the alignment because we're using the accuracy of the CNC and the topography of the shapes. In other words, if everything lines up square, the whole thing is straight. And part of the reason for that is we didn't want to have to build a giant jig to put the whole thing in, because a jig would be as much work as building the whole bike. And that's often the problem. So we wanted to come up with a way that we could ensure everything lines up and squares up nicely to create a nice, true, straight frame. Yeah, we've also increased the depth of this whole box here, and it will have openings that will allow storage on the inside. So the whole deck becomes a large storage area in which you can put stuff that you need to carry, as well as whole stuff on top of that. It will now have sides, it will have a lot of cool stuff. This is the, this thing is the equivalent of this part here. And it looks very complicated, in fact it is very complicated, but it has all this relief in it because instead of a rigid steering arm, we're actually going with cables. So there'll be a cable either side running through little brass wheels, and it will run from the steering down through the body and up to the front fork. We have no idea if this is going to work. This is the problem. We already got one version that semi-worked and the second version that we hope will fully work. And how many weeks is it? 3 weeks to the competition. So, we're crapping our pants as we speak, but what can you do? So I think model number 3, and we've already decided, here's part of the problem of being an industrial designer. You never know when to stop designing. There has to be a time when you put the pen down and step away. And I haven't learned to do that yet. So the problem for me is that even as I'm building this, I'm thinking about number 2. And now I'm building number 2, I'm thinking about number 3. And we think number 3 will backpedal a little bit towards this design, but we'll keep some of the features of this that we really liked. We'll see. Some people have asked us about, are we going to make a business out of this? And that's a definite no. Utility cycling is a small but growing niche. Cargo bikes like this are a tiny, tiny little niche within a niche. And wooden cargo bikes are probably a completely non-existent niche. So, but what we might do, and I think we probably will do, is once we get to a level where we're really happy with the design, we'll probably do one of those Creative Commons things and make the files, the 3D files, available for download for people to have a go themselves. I would love for people to start building their own wooden cargo bikes and come up with way better solutions than we did. That would be fabulous. But I think what it shows is that this methodology of building has real can make a viable bicycle. Whether it can make a viable business, I don't know. But without a question, you can build a wooden bicycle or even a wooden cargo bike, and it will perform exactly as you would expect it to perform. Any questions?
Does it float?
It probably would. In fact, I think if we filled in this bit, it probably would. Although obviously it would be really top heavy, so the first thing it would probably float really well upside down. But yeah. Don't be shy. I'm going to ask you a question.
So why did you choose ply instead of something like bamboo? Just regular bamboo.
Well, because we had access to the CNC machine. I mean, that really drove the development process. I built this as a model in a computer program called SolidWorks, and then from there we were able to create DXF files that could be toolpathed for a CNC router. So that really kind of drove that.
But it was also because we thought we were going to do solid, but we built our proof of concept and it worked so well that.
Yeah, so that way we kind of changed direction. We loved this so much, it really did it so well that we kind of went this way. Now, there's something I like about getting a two-dimensional sheet of 8x4 ply and cutting all these weird shapes and then ending up with something like this. There's something, it's the same reason I love origami. It's that same thing. You start with a piece of paper and you fold it up, and then you get this object that fills a three-dimensional space. And I've always been interested in that. One of my favorite features in SolidWorks is the sheet metal feature. You can take a flat object and bend it and cut it and make a hopper or whatever. I mean, you can make a lot of interesting stuff. This idea of cutting two-dimensional surfaces and then assembling them into three-dimensional objects has always fascinated me. I got a piece of furniture at home. I did in design school that was exactly that thing. A stool with no screws, glues, or fasteners, everything slotting together. And there's I think it's one of those things that's sort of deceptively simple, but can lead to this very interesting complexity that comes out of that. So that's fun.
How far do you plan on going with the wood concept? Like, I see a lot of metal. Like, do you eventually want to make it like more wood than metal, or is it not?
Well, in a sense, we are going for less metal. Currently, this has metal inserts here and here. On this one, we're just going to do away with it completely, and we're just going to have a very tight tolerance and wedge the headset bearing right in there and see if it holds. Again, it's an experiment. We have no idea whether it will fall out or crack or whatever. But again, like I say, we're in a constant state of experimentation and discovery. We're always being surprised by what stuff does or doesn't do.
What are your thoughts on taking this exact same design and replicating it using aluminum?
Why?
I'm just curious.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure there would be. Well, yeah. Okay. Here's number one. We are terrible at metalworking. There's some welding here and there in this bike.
Because I'm a metal worker. And
Oh, there you go. I'll send you the files so you can build them.
That's how I would do it.
I have several questions. You said you went with this stuff because of the CNC. Now, this is just a question. Was that out of laziness from woodworking, or
No,
just
actually.
speed, or
Well, it is, because if you were to take one of these profiles and have to cut it out in wood, I mean, you could do it with routers and fences and so on, but it would take you a long time. We've got it now where, 2 or 3 hours of tool pathing will cut us a sheet of 8x4 in all these shapes and save us literally days of work. That doesn't mean that the work disappears, because you've still got to sand and fit and glue. There's still plenty of work, even if you don't, cut it out.
One of the reasons I ask is I grew up in the deep interior of Alaska, and everything we had, our boats, our paddles, our dog sleds, everything, fish wheels, made out of wood.
Mm-hmm.
And birch is just incredible in the heat and in the cold. We didn't have all the epoxies, and this is just stirring up all kinds of stuff, this glue, goop, whatever you
epoxy resin.
Now what if you took a blend of like hemp and bamboo and braided it and made your own
Tubes
to
and
make
stuff.
more organic?
Well, in fact, yeah, there is a guy called Brano Mears. Let me write his name because his website is absolutely worth visiting.
Some weird questions.
Okay, give me a second here. Brano Mears is a graphic designer from Slovakia, of all places, who builds the most incredible one-off bicycles you'll ever see. You know, for instance, he built his own carbon fiber mountain bike. Well, that's no big deal. He got sheet titanium, cut it out into shapes, bent it and riveted it together and made an entire bike frame. But one of the things he did was to take bamboo matting and use epoxy resin and make his own tubes and make a complete bamboo composite bicycle. So it could be done. The problem was, and I looked into doing that, but the problem was merging the organic forms with the nice flat surfaces that we wanted for a cargo bike. You know, if you look at your traditional cargo bike, it's a tubular frame with a big wooden box bolted on there. So the frame and the wooden box don't share nothing in common in terms of, you know, from a design point of view. They're very different forms. That doesn't mean you couldn't be done. I just think it would be a little bit of a struggle to integrate two very different needs. And one of them being a flat surface with all these very organic shapes. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but you know, that didn't appeal to us. We decided we really wanted to go with this stuff together, yeah.
So with, I noticed that you add a lot of filler to the epoxy now.
Mm-hmm.
So is that more to add fibers to add strength, or is it to give it that shape?
A bit of both.
It's kind of equal.
Bit of both.
Yeah.
Because
It's largely the shape.
It's mostly the shape.
yeah, the fillet is what
It's
distributes the
It's
stress.
all about surface area.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. I just never really like it. So you just glue it together. I don't know. But it's pretty cool how.
Do you anticipate what your cargo or what your weight capacity will be on the new bike?
We don't. And we have, you know, neither of us as engineers, we have no sort of objective way to, you know, it's going to be one of those suck it and see things. We'll throw a bunch of weight on it and see what happens. Maybe, you know, when this is all said and done, maybe we'll get the original and see if we can do a destruction test on it and keep loading up and see at which point the thing fails. Or not. Maybe I just love this too much and I won't be able to do that. But here's the thing. I mean, you know, people have been building bicycles for, you know, over 100 years now. And I would say almost none of them, you know, apart from the big manufacturers, you know, none of the small frame builders or these were ever engineers. It was always like, okay, let's throw it together, ride it, see what happens. You know, oh, this one's a bit bendy, okay, we'll figure it out. It's trial and error. And I think, you know, that kind of direct experience is very informative. I think you learn a lot.
Well, I'm a plumber. I do everything on my bicycle. So
Oh,
if you ever want a test subject.
For a heavyweight, all right.
You mentioned you use a lot of glues. I was curious, did you ever think about actually building it without glue? Like,
Yeah, I did, but you put the kibosh on that. Jeff deals with boats, you know, they're in the water all the time. Everything has to be encapsulated in plastic or else it's not going to work. Well, and also the other issue, of course, is abrasion resistance. One of the things that will happen with this, you know, which we didn't do with this one, I don't know whether you can tell, but there's some good old divots here and there where I've dropped it on the ground. And that's the downside of wood as a material for bikes. It doesn't have very good abrasion and impact resistance. So the outer surface of number 2 will have 4-ounce fiberglass cloth on it, not for strength, purely to give it more abrasion resistance.
It's going to stiffen it up tremendously though.
And it will also stiffen it up tremendously, but it's mainly to do with abrasion resistance, so it doesn't get tore up if you lay it down on the ground.
How many sheets does it currently take for frame number 2?
2.
2.
Not including the 4mm that we'll use for the underside and the front surface. We don't have to cut those out. We do that at the last minute. We lay it in and trim it to shape. One of the interesting things for me, not being a woodworker, is realizing sort of how much stuff you can kind of do by eye, you know, after the fact. You know, I was thinking, you know, I got to cut every single piece and figure out how it's all going to go. And Jeff has taught me that, you can do some of it, and the rest will kind of like, we'll kind of you know, we'll fit it in somehow and get it to work. And unfortunately, Jeff has all these wonderful techniques and tools, things like, you know, trim routers and wonderful stuff like that. That actually, here's a funny story. Well, it wasn't funny at the time. I mean, it was an aneurysm. But this thing here, this is the center mast. That's, you know, basically goes in this gap right here. And it has all these wheels and everything going in there. And we glued it all together. And then, you know, I was saying to Jeff, well, the gap in there is exactly 2 inches. And he's measuring this and said, well, it's only 1 7/8. How can it be 1 7/8? And we missed a whole profile. We glued it all together, 1 profile short. At which point I was really about to shoot myself right there, because it was, I think, basically my fault. But then, luckily we had this 4 mil, so we stuck a piece on either side, glued it down, you know, it was hanging over the edges, and then we got the trim router and cut it to shape. And then we'll put it through the planer and get it to exactly the same. So we saved that. But that's the kind of things we do. Here's a great one. Okay, so we thought, hey, 1/4 inch bamboo plywood, how cool. So I designed this entire model based on 1/4 inch plywood, only it's 0.27 of an inch, not 0.25. So that meant we spent a lot of time filing out all the little slots so everything will fit together. This is the kind of, you know, it doesn't matter how smart you get, you're never smart enough not to do something really obviously stupid. Every time, we're like, no! So yeah, we did, and we always think, you know, this time it's going to be perfect. Yes.
How long from concept to what we see here?
This one just over 2 months, from pretty much a blank sheet of paper to, yeah, interesting. I mean, again, we have this great synergy, and once you know we you know get rolling on it, we're pretty good. Unfortunately, we wallowed in something all summer. Jeff got really busy. I had a son to entertain. And then it was like, oh, there's only a month till Oregon Manifest. We really ought to build that second version. And so now we're racing 2 nights a week, probably weekends, and a few all-nighters, I think, before we get there. Yeah, it's terrifying. Any more questions? We're all done. Yeah, I mean, I want to say, oh, go ahead. No, right.
The ribs.
The
I
ribs.
see them 3 here, 2 there. Any, personally, being a woodworker, I would like to see them tweaked and shifted and organic.
The whole
Not necessarily 45s. Even
Yeah, but a
tweak it this way.
CNC machine, a 3-axis CNC machine, cuts 90 degrees really nicely.
$1,600 hand carving
Yeah,
set.
I can hand work all day.
Well, for instance, the little top cap here was just completely eyeballed. In fact, that was one of the most awesome things to watch Jeff create this out of thin air with nothing but a bevel gauge and a number 2 pencil. It's great. I don't think it's actually symmetrical, but you know, it looks great. Well, that's the other thing I guess I've learned is that, you know, in life things don't have to be that accurate. You know, you think when you do something like a CNC, I've got to get within 1,000ths of an inch or it's not going to work.
No, you just have to be a little pickier than your client.
All right, no more questions? Well, I definitely want to thank Tobias for inviting me down to this. This has been great fun, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael and Jeff. Tomorrow night, I wanted to let you guys know we are hosting Walk-In Wine's Portland debut. Walk-In Wine is an international social event concept born in New York, consisting of a simple formula: 40 people, 40 pounds of jumbo prawns served on a communal table, and 40 bottles of delicious wine. It's quite fun and has been connecting some of the most inspiring and creative people around the world. There's still a few tickets available, so if you're interested in attending, you can talk to me or Lizzie and Peter here, who are from Walk-In Wine, after we wrap up. The next Curiosity Club is September 13th, and we have Mark Keppinger. Mark Keppinger manufactures high-quality tube theremins here in Portland. He's recently developed circuit boards for a new theremin prototype, which he will share with us alongside some of his past models. All right. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to come up and check out the bike.
Yeah.
Get a closer look.
That's right, yes. I heard you. That's why I said oh, really? I wanted to see that.
Boy Scout shit.
I made it at a Walgreens. Yeah, back home.
Boy Scouts
Yeah, I mean, that's totally good.